Hey everyone, Adrian here. Welcome to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Alexander, Dr. Eben Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's great to be here, Adrian. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I knew that I was having you on this morning. Obviously, I'm from the future, so everything works out. We win. It's all good. So been watching your YouTube videos, and I've been listening to some previous podcasts that you've been on. And I knew that I was interviewing you earlier this morning, but I stuffed up the times a little bit. But I woke up again at like 2:30 in the morning, and then I woke up again at 5:30 in the morning, just sort of in anticipation of what was about to come today, because, we're going to have an interesting conversation, nothing too heavy, just, the meaning of life. Why am I here? All of those light-hearted questions.
Hitting on the high points, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll get you to tell your story in a second, but I really am interested in the afterlife. I'm interested in the spirituality side of things. I come from a religious background, although I'm not sure whether I think we have some synergies in the sense of we're in an interesting precipice in life. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think, for many people and certainly for humanity at large, we're at an inflection point, I would call it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think that what I'm seeing from the outside, because like I said, I grew up in the Catholic school. So I went to a Catholic primary school, Catholic high school, and did the whole sort of church on Sunday until you're old enough to kind of make your own decisions. And then, you only go on Christmas and Easter and, all those sorts of things. And then eventually it just sort of phased it out. That's my edition of it anyway. So the thing is, though, in the last couple of years, particularly because of the world events that have been happening with the pandemic, with wars that are at bay and all that kind of stuff, it seems like there is a huge push or a huge gravitation, I would say, towards religion, towards a higher purpose, towards someone coming to save us. It seems like the book of Revelations and all of these sort of prophecies type of like those things are coming about more and more. I'm not sure if it's just me or whether you would agree with this, but it just seems like that seems to be a huge trajectory of where people are going to, in order to, I don't know, maybe seek counsel or advice or leadership in some way, shape, or form, because obviously the leaders of the world are just, not really leading at all. What are your take?
Well,
What's your take on that?
I would say you're right on target with this. And in fact, I've spent 15 years since I was in coma for a week with a bacterial meningoencephalitis, my near-death experience, that, where I witnessed and had experience that I later knew by examining my medical records with fellow physicians were impossible. My brain could not have had a dream or hallucination. And so I was forced into a recognition of consciousness as being something far greater than just the product of the brain. And I was very heartened in my 15 years of scientific research to realize this is exactly where scientists who study consciousness and all aspects of human experience are going, is this notion of a kind of a unified mind that we share, that we're all in this together. In many ways, the near-death experience is kind of the tip of the spear that leads in the proper direction. And you don't have to have religion to get out of this. We don't have to depend on 2,000-year-old scripture and religious ideologies. Now, it turns out religions have tried in some fashion to convey the message of the prophets, that is, a message of love, kindness, compassion, and mercy. They've tried that for thousands of years. And of course, the problem is, they tend to lose sight of the deepest, most powerful message, which is of oneness and of the binding force of love. I mean, that's essentially what we were taught. I grew up in a Christian environment too, in a Methodist church. And all of that is wonderful as far as it goes. But it turns out that near-death experiences provide us with an even stronger and more direct signal of how important that oneness and connection and sense of being in this together is. Because, for example, in near-death experiences in the life review, which is described in somewhere between 25 and 50%, depending on the study, of near-death experiences. But in the life review, you find that it's a reliving of events, not just a remembering. And not only that, it's a reliving of events from everybody's perspective. That's the surprising thing. Your, quote, life review doesn't just involve your perceptions, but it actually involves what other people felt in your interactions with them. And that's why, in so many ways, the golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe in the form of these life reviews, where we realize that ultimately we're all sharing the dream of the one mind. We're all in this together. And as near-death experiencers come back in large numbers proclaiming, the only important thing about how we interact with others, as revealed through the life review, is how much love we're able to share with our fellow beings. That was the exact message from Armenian soldier killed in battle 2,400 years ago, written about by Plato in the Republic. And when was brought back to life, just before they lit up the funeral pyre, he said, when you die, your life flashes before your eyes, and the only important thing is how much love you've managed to share with the world. And that would be the same kind of story that could come out of a battlefield today or any other near-death experience today. And it really is the ultimate message, because our materialist culture has improperly focused us on the individual. In conventional science is broadly known as reductive materialism. That simply means if you break down the material in our physical world to its tiniest little subatomic particles and its constituents, that all you have to do is understand how the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology combine that matter, and you'll explain everything that happens. But that completely ignores the will of sentient beings, which has a tremendous influence on this. And in fact, some materialist scientists would scoff at you if you claim to have free will, because they think it's all just chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, everything just following the laws of nature. But they see no way to inject free will or choices into it at all. And yet what the near-death experience community, especially the scientific emergence of the science of consciousness around not only neuroscience, and the role that the brain plays, but also you must move beyond that, because it's crystal clear the brain is not fundamentally creating conscious experience, that there's much more to it. Quantum physics, in fact, weighs in heavily on telling us that there is a role of the mind in all of this. And in fact, you come to realize how important the role of the mind is, and that mind is not reducible to brain at all. And this is where the true power of human free will and our ability to heal ourselves, mind over matter, you can move from placebo effect through spontaneous remissions into the miraculous healings that are often associated with near-death experiences, and start realizing how important this acknowledgement of our spiritual component is. And the spiritual component is ultimately defined by the fact that it's interconnected. That's why when people have a near-death experience, they can be connected to minds of those still alive on this planet. They may be thousands of miles away, but you can connect directly with their mind. That's often a story told in NDEs. But not only that, NDEers can connect with the minds of those who have left the physical plane, who have already, their body has already died. So that mental layer of the universe is a layer of information, integration, and assimilation that's very important to get. And it's a shared layer that we have access to as sentient beings. And it basically is in that collective, it's the mind of the universe. But that's what we're really sharing. And even though we all think, that our mental contents are isolated, just this little, isolated unit of consciousness, it's pretty easy to show telepathy is real, for example, in identical twins. You'll find that 35% of identical twins have very powerful telepathic experiences. And that's just the beginning of the discussion of how we're connected through that mental layer. But the important thing is to realize that when our brain and body die, it's not the end of that conscious eddy current that was partitioned off to be part of us from the universal mind, but it's actually a rejoining of that eddy current with the primordial mind. And that's what occurs in an NDE. And that's why they can witness full-blown life reviews, your life, birth to death, everything in between, being relived, not just remembered. And also from the perspective of all participants. That's the interesting thing. And that's what shows us we really need to treat each other much better than we do in this kind of falsely separated materialistic world. Because ultimately, what we're finding is the science of consciousness with quantum physics, philosophy of mind, neuroscience, all the evidence for non-local consciousness from parapsychology. All of these things are discussed in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, where we make this case very strongly unifying science and spirituality. I think in so many ways, you're right on target about this. And it's all about that unity of consciousness that's so important to get.
Well, you've you've covered so much in that short little bite there. I think there's so much to uncover and unpack with everything that you said. My mind goes to, because you've got a scientific background, right? So I want people to go and research you, because I've done a fair bit of research. I'm going to start your book the moment I finish this book called The Body Keeps a Score. It's a very intense book that I'm reading at the moment, so it's something that requires all of my attention and focus. But your scientific background must wrestle with the spirituality and that sort of esoteric. There's more to our this meat suit than what we've been led to believe, right? So I just want to ask you a question. When it comes to going back to the religion side of things and the 2,000-year-old texts and all that kind of stuff, how does your mind wrestle with so much information that is put into one book about one man's life and all of his friends and everyone that's been associated with him, and telling some stories about his life? I like all of the messages that go on in there. However, it does conflict with a lot of what I would consider my real-time view on how the world is, so or how my body is, or how the mind is. You mentioned things about telepathic abilities and all those sorts of things, and it kind of reminds me when I talk to my kids about this. I go, I can tell my brain to tell my finger to move, but who tells my brain to tell the finger to move? Like, it's that person or that thing that's behind the meat suit and all the mechanics of it. What's that thing? When I go into meditation and I speak to the higher version of Adrian, and this voice comes back to me and gives me intel, who's that voice? And so this is the wrestle between the 2,000-year-old scripture and God and all of those things, as well as your own intuition and your own ability into feeling and thinking and acting and behaving in such a way in this 3D dynamic that is an interesting place. So how do you wrestle with all of that, given your scientific mind and then your near-death experience?
Well, it turns out that from a scientific perspective, all of this starts to make more sense when you realize that there is one mind. You can call it the God mind or what have you. I tend to shy away from that God word, as I did in Proof of Heaven. I call that deity Om, because that was the sound I heard in that realm. And it turns out that I realized that, it doesn't matter if you're trying to label that identified loving awareness, that power at the core of the universe. If you want to call it God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, give up on assuming that by labeling it and defining it, you're owning it and controlling it in some way. That's not what's going on here. What we are discovering is, through personal experience, you find that there is a mind far greater than your own. And the first place to kind of reject our a lot of what we're taught in society is that little voice in your head is not your consciousness. The little voice in your head, I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls a voice in your head your annoying roommate. Good start, okay? Because the mystery of consciousness is the awareness of that, the ability to observe and be aware of things around us. In fact, we're really sharing the mind of the universe, and that mind of the universe is one of awareness of existence. And that's where the real magic lies. And so the brain is a reducing valve or a filter, a transceiver that allows a little eddy current from that primordial mind to come into your mind. And then you start kind of building that up as kind of the identity of who you are. but in dreams and psychedelic experiences and spontaneous epiphanies and near-death experiences, there are all kinds of ways that we can start to realize that our mind actually encompasses much more of the universe than just our little personal space. And this is especially obvious in a near-death experience, where you connect with minds of those still living, minds of those who passed, et cetera, and you do it in such a profound fashion that you start making much more in the way of connection, of understanding. And I'm sorry, we're getting some chip in from my the two visiting professors, my little Schipperke and Pomeranian here, barking in the background. They're trying to chip in that they agree wholeheartedly with what I'm saying. But anyway, getting back to where I was going with this, the science is what really rescues us. There's so many people out there who thought, they would ask me, what do your skeptical scientific colleagues make of all this? Turns out that some of my greatest support over the last 15 years has been from my skeptical scientific colleagues, because they realize this is all headed in a direction of truth, as opposed to all the kind of falsehoods that we believed before, especially about materialism or physicalism, that only the physical world exists, that somehow we must muster a mechanism by which the physical substance of the brain is combined in such a way that it gives us phenomenal experience, the contents of mind. And that really is a very unreasonable demand that doesn't make any sense. And what we start to see is it makes far better sense to realize that consciousness and even memory are not resident in the brain itself. And this is all a story that we tell very fully and from a scientific perspective in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. But it's really about uniting science and spirituality. And quantum physics has been looking for an answer for 100 years. And they've struggled desperately to try and come up with a way to explain the experimental findings. And finally, in the year 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics to John Clauser, Alain Aspect, and Anton Zeilinger was given for entanglement. Entanglement is that absolutely drop the mic moment of, there's something else going on here than just causality within a physical realm. That mind is real. John Archibald Wheeler, the head of one of the Manhattan Project's directors and head of quantum physics at Princeton University in the mid-20th century, came up with a participatory anthropic principle. That's the only way he could make sense of the findings of quantum physics, which demanded, by his placing the word anthropic in there, the mind of sentient beings is crucial at determining what emerges in this reality of ours. And it goes far beyond simply assuming that it's just material substance combining by the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. End of story. There's so much more to it that is of great relevance to all of us who are, in a spiritual pursuit or wanting to understand life or just this world, this universe in general. I mean, for anyone who even wants to understand quantum physics, you pay a tremendous price by not acknowledging that mental layer of the universe, the realm of mind, where our minds interact and where all that information, assimilates and accumulates. That is the bigger model of reality that we must entertain. And it's a model where we come to realize that there's no way to explain the phenomena of mind through the workings of the brain alone. There's far too much to it. And there's far too much of it that's non-local. That is, that absolutely accesses minds and events and realities at a great distance across space and time. And that includes the encountering of other minds. So it really is a direct answer to the deepest scientific questions, to come away realizing this oneness of mind, that we're all in this together, that binding force of love that is so obvious to near-death experiencers, is the principle that needs to reawaken this world, that we're here to take care of each other and take care of this planet. And the false sense of separation inherent in materialist thinking is the enemy of the successful thriving of humankind and of this planet at large, because of all the greed and selfishness, corporate greed of the energy industry, things like that, the almighty profit dollar, where we knew scientifically as early as 1912 that burning carbon-based fuels would ultimately make the planet too hot to inhabit. And when I was training in the 70s and 80s, we just assumed that it was a horrible problem for our children and grandchildren. And now, of course, we realize that climate change is right in our face. And it's getting much worse every year than our worst predictions of the year before. And that is all from a false sense of separation from that materialist model. Once we realize that our minds are connected, that we're all interconnected with each other and with the universe at large, our sense of responsibility naturally grows, and our little petty, egocentric, kind of narcissistic view of selves and all of our demands from the world, we come to realize are nonsensical. And really, this is about the higher good, taking care of each other, and honoring this kind of sense of loving connections is where we really turn this world around. And we don't have to depend on religion for that, but the science of consciousness is absolutely leading us in a very powerful direction. For those who want the science of the afterlife, just go to bigelowinstitute.org. You'll find 28 essays written 2 years ago by scientists, all having more than 5 years of experience in the field. And you'll find that scientific evidence proving the afterlife and reincarnation is already there. Now, people deny it because they might not remember past lives, but as the scientists who study reincarnation literature will tell you, you need to get these memories before children are age 6 or 7, because they're natural processes that cover over all of our memories of between lives and past lives. I guess to give us skin in the game, so we have the buy-in. But the good news is near-death experiences and many other lines of evidence help us to realize that this is a much bigger story of kind of mind over matter, and that we have tremendous capabilities to influence our own health. And just starting at bigelowinstitute.org is an excellent way to start gleaning the data that proves the reality of the afterlife, of reincarnation, that our souls are eternal. And when you realize all of this supports the science of NDEs, you'll recognize that NDEs are kind of the tip of the spear to show us that love, kindness, and compassion are the ultimate messages of this kind of broader interpretation of human experience. And that's where we really need to go.
Do you find when someone pushes back on that concept, this is kind of really throwing in the face of religion? So despite all of the things that you say, which I agree with, I think that to give you some feedback that I get it's kind of like when I talk to God and I talk to being God-like or being Christ-like or embodying Christ-like values, when I talk to me being like, the thing that I try and get across to people is to say, Eben, everything that's in the earth is in me. Everything that's in the water is in me. Everything that's in the stars and the moon is inside me. So if God created this, then I am God in creation, and I am going to be God-like and Christ-like in the way that I carry this meat suit through this existence in 3D. People straight away attack me and they say, you're a blasphemous, you're not God, you're not all of these things. And I love all the oneness and the divine consciousness, and I am divinity and divinity is me, and all those sorts of things. So when you get pushed back, because you must, that, like, how do you define God, and how do you I guess argue to the degree that in a layman's terms, like what your experience has brought you to come to understanding about God, and about, like, I even want you to go to the origins of this world. The science would have you look at an event like the Big Bang, which would determine everything after the fact. However, in saying that, it's kind of like, well, there is universes, and then there's multiverses, and there's all these sort of different planets. And if you look at reincarnation, you look at different life forms, and you look at the splice of time, and you look at other entities that have visited the earth, I mean, it just goes so far beyond the fact that this one guy in the sky created everything in 7 days. So can you...
Well, yeah.
It's a long-winded question. I know it's quite loaded. So,
well, what I would tell you is, I think there's a very easy way forward for the kind of challenge that you're talking about here. Now, for me, just in terms of getting to definitions, let's start with this one. in my journey, as I explained in the book Proof of Heaven, going through multiple layers, getting to that final core, that sanctum sanctorum of the divine, where all dualities coalesce into unity, and that sense where I was bathing in that ocean of love, of creation, of that God force, I recognized that the very source of my conscious awareness was that God force. But do not think for one second that that is Eben Alexander's little ego dancing around pretending it's God. This is the exact opposite of that. It's an acknowledgement of my ego and really kind of how small that ego is, but also an acknowledgement of the grander aspects of my higher soul. And the higher soul is never, quote, mine. It's not something you own. Higher soul is interconnected with higher souls of other beings. That's how we have that mental connection of being able to witness minds of those alive, minds of those who've left the physical world, but it's all alive and going in the process of a near-death experience. So to me, that God force is the very source of our conscious awareness. So none of us are ever, at some great distance away from that, but our ego can kind of fool us into that. And this is where I would say it's very important to point out that I think so much of what is my current understanding of spirituality and of science and of the God force and of mind and brain and their relationship, the nature of consciousness, is truly all about this notion of one mind and how we're sharing that one mind. So what you're then looking for are the different ways in which that kind of mind is kind of parceled out into these individual beings and how that all works. But ultimately, you were talking a little while ago about the teachings of Christianity. And here's where I would draw a small differential. And that is to say that I would claim that Jesus of Nazareth absolutely knew of reincarnation. And because Jesus spoke of John the Baptist being a reincarnated prophet, earlier prophet. So for him, reincarnation was absolutely real. Not only that, but even in reading the book of John and comparing it, for example, with the book of Thomas. Book of Thomas is one of my favorite books of the Bible. I love Elaine Pagel's writings on that. But the important thing to get is that that when Christ appeared after the crucifixion, he appeared in a house, even described in the book of John, which is a rebuttal of the book of Thomas. And John is probably the most materialistic chapter of all. But in that book, he makes it clear that Christ appeared in a house with locked windows and doors. So what he was telling us is that Christ was a kind of a light body apparition. And do remember that I don't know where it is in the Bible, but somewhere Christ says, "These things and greater ye shall do." And to me, he was just pointing out, he was simply demonstrating to us the human capability of light body, continuing to exist after death of the physical body. And also, of course, he appeared much younger. That's why Mary Magdalene did not recognize him in the Garden of Gethsemane, thought he was the gardener, because he had passed at 33, but here he was in his late teens, as most bodies appear in a light body apparition, which is very common in today's world of near-death experiences. So he was simply showing us capabilities of all of us. And also his saying, the kingdom of God lies within, was his acknowledgement of what modern science of consciousness is coming to realize, which is that all of the physical world is ultimately resultant from that realm of the mental. And so all of this that we see around us is very cleverly presented out there as if it's out there. But one thing that quantum physics tells us very clearly is that the objective physical world out there doesn't exist as it appears, that every bit of it is completely dependent on the observing mind. And that's where all of this starts to take on some real power. And you start realizing, especially when you take the lead from near-death experiences, that realm is not kind of iffy about whether or not there's a God and whether or not love is the defining principle of our existence. More than 90% of near-death experiencers going back thousands of years, and this includes many who were previously agnostic or atheistic, more than 90% of them come away knowing, not just believing, they know the reality of a loving personal God at the core of this universe. Why don't we believe the people who have been there? Now, in the past, you had scientists who would recoil and say, no, wait a minute, the brain creates consciousness. These are all hallucinations. Pay them no mind. Well, that is not the truth. The truth is these experiences are broad. In fact, if you ask around, you probably find your neighbors have had them. And they're not just wishful thinking. That's what people who analyze these experiences will tell you. Go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and you'll find academic scholars who have spent the last 6 decades studying telepathy, remote viewing, acquisition of information across space and time. They've studied near-death experiences, shared-death experiences. They've studied past life memories in children, suggestive of reincarnation. In fact, at UVA, they've studied more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children over the last 6 decades. And of those, 1,700 are solved. Solved means they actually identified the person who lived before that is described by this 2.5 or 3-year-old child who had no other way of gaining the information. And you can pretend, well, I don't remember being reincarnated. I don't remember past life. Well, as the doctors who do this stuff will tell you, you must recover those memories before age 6 or 7, because in most of us, those memories are covered over by natural processes. So by the time we're 10 or 11 years old, we don't remember past lives in between lives. And that has a tremendous influence. But the bottom line is scientists who study these cases will tell you about their reality. We're not meant to discover all the realities of this world based on one's own personal experience alone, but personal experience is very, very important. And that's why centering prayer, meditation, these are so crucial. I've spent the last 10 plus years of my life an hour or two a day meditating. I use sacred acoustics. It's a form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment. Full disclosure, that was a company co-founded by my partner, Karen Newell, who is the co-author of the book Living in a Mindful Universe. But in fact, I'm the one who convinced them to start a company, because when I was listening to these tones about 2 years after my coma and realized how powerful they were in helping me get into a deep transcendental state of revisiting my NDE, I knew they'd be important for other people too. So I encouraged them to form the company Sacred Acoustics, and people can learn more at sacredacoustics.com. But I was attracted to binaural beats because of their power on the lower brainstem in liberating this kind of conscious awareness out of the sense of here, now, and sense of self into a much broader kind of recognition of reality and kind of a more eternal soul viewpoint. And that's where I found Sacred Acoustics to be especially powerful. But all of this is available to any one of us who want to learn more about it. Living in a Mindful Universe, follow up to Proof of Heaven, and also Proof of Heaven. That book, there's now a 10th anniversary edition that has 36 additional pages beyond the original book. So there's a lot more material about what's happened in the last 10 years in the newest version of Proof of Heaven. But all of this is material that takes us, and especially that bigelowinstitute.org, if you start reading those essays, you'll realize we've gone far beyond just whether or not the afterlife is real to a point of scientifically addressing how it works and how we can interact more readily and effectively with that mental layer of the universe. And that means especially, take full advantage of this lifetime and not be sucker punched by the lie of materialist science, that bleak and paltry fiction that pretends that the brain creates consciousness out of physical matter, and that all your phenomenal experience is nothing more than an epiphenomenon of chemical reactions and electron fluxes in the brain, which is what they would try and tell you. But that is not where the modern science of consciousness is headed. And if you just go to that uvadops.org, go to ebenalexander.com, go to scientificandmedical.net, go to galileocommission.org, all of those websites will start showing you a much bigger picture of reality. And the one I'd like to add to that is Inner Sanctum Center, INNER Sanctum Center, is another website Karen and I created. It has a lot of free options and then some paid options, including a mental health course for practitioners that's very spiritually enlightened. There also are a set of interviews we did during the pandemic on innersanctumcenter.com. all for free. They were with thought leaders around the world on the consciousness revolution, other experiencers, et cetera. And then, of course, there's also a monthly webinar that people have access to where we interact live with a lot of people who are interested in these questions. All that is at innersanctumcenter.com. But this revolution is well underway. It's good news for all of humanity. And you don't have to wait for the scientific community to catch up, even though they are running fast and trying to catch up as best they can. But this is all about the liberation of humanity from under the yoke of falsehood, of materialist thought, and the false claim that the brain creates consciousness out of physical matter.
Amazing. If you've got time, there's a couple of extra questions I want to ask. I think maybe the listeners would like to know maybe the brief version of your near-death experience and what you saw on the other side. I would personally like to know how you come to recall so much information after your coma and things like that. I think that I find that part of it fascinating, that there must be some sort of mechanism or some ability to recall that information to such a degree that gave you so many profound learnings as to how to interpret that whole experience, because like it's a lot to take on, and a lot of what you are saying is obviously synonymous with other people that have had near-death experiences, but also, like you mentioned a little while ago, the psychedelic experience. There's a lot of correlation between experiencing that one love, that unity consciousness, all those sorts of things. But so people don't have to have a dark night of the soul, or they don't have to have a near-death experience to learn from you, or to learn from the same lessons. I'd love for you to maybe go into all of that and just I'd like to hear all of that, what you saw on the other side, how you interpret it, how you recalled that information. That'd be fascinating to know.
Well, there's a tremendous amount here that you
yeah,
put
I
out
know
there.
it's hard to
But
condense
let me
it all
start. There's one piece I have to put out of the way quickly. The psychedelic experiences, very important to point out. There have been several papers, scientific studies done in the last 12 years, especially on people under influence of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, but also LSD and DMT. The important point I'm making here is when you use functional MRI and magnetoencephalography, which are very precise ways of looking at the neurons in the brain, all the brain cells that contribute to cognition, and looking at what they're doing, what you find is universally under the influence of such serotonin 2A type plant medicines, entheogens, or psychedelics, whatever you want to call that, psilocybin, DMT, LSD, that the brain goes dark. You won't find any part of the brain that is increasing in activity. And that'll be a shock to people who have taken such substances and realize, my gosh, my brain must be lighting up like a Christmas tree to give me this experience. No. The brain is getting out of the way. And if you're a neuroscientist looking for neurocorrelates of consciousness and you want to find out about that psychedelic experience and what about it in the brain causes it to be so phenomenal, you're going to be sadly disappointed. You're not going to find answers in looking at the brain and brain cells, because that's not where it's happening. It's happening in that mental layer, in the spiritual realm of the universe. Now, I'll try and get directly back to, I think, the main thrust of your question. And that has to do with my own NDE, which I described in detail in Proof of Heaven. It's out there in many different YouTube talks if you want to hear more about all of it. But the reality is, and important to point out before I go on, that there's a medical case report written on my medical records by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but absolutely astonished by my recovery. And that's something people out in the non-medical world can't appreciate, is how absolutely astonishing it is that I'm sitting here talking to you now, at age 69, 15 years post a week in coma due to the severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis. That shouldn't happen. And in fact, when the 3 doctors submitted the case report to the peer review editors of the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, those peer review editors said, wait a minute, this is unprecedented in medical literature to have somebody this ill from bacterial meningoencephalitis to make a full recovery. How do you explain it? They said it's because he had a near-death experience. They knew of other cases like Anita Morjani, whose stage 4 lymphoma and deep coma all vanished, and her cancer vanished after her NDE. Dr. Mary C. Neal, over 30-minute warm water drowning while kayaking in Chile. And Dr. Mary C. Neal was brought to the surface dead. They resuscitated her. She ended up making a full recovery. Ask any doctor how an over 30-minute warm water drowning leaves you. They'll say your brain is plus. It dissolves. It's no longer there. How did she end up having this recovery? Well, this is what these doctors who wrote the case report knew. And the scientific reviewers at the journal said, okay, we know of these cases too. So that was plenty sufficient for them. So, in other words, there's big objective scientific and medical evidence supporting my argument that my brain was in no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination, much less the most profound, memorable, detailed, meaningful, and transformational set of events of my entire lifetime. That's what you were asking earlier. How can these things be so deeply, profoundly remembered when your brain was so damaged in the process of getting there? And that, of course, gets us to the heart of the problem, which is mind over matter, spirit over matter, as Karen keeps reminding me. And the more we kind of acknowledge this and kind of see ourselves as this larger soul with a larger mission, and to bring in that love of the universe for self and others, to use that love to bring healing and wholeness into each and every one of us, to empower prayers and distance healing, that kind of thing. This starts to explain so much more of what really happens in this universe. And the more people will try it, the more they'll find evidence in their own personal life that it's absolutely real. And that is why, proof of heaven is out there, living in a mindful universe is out there, inner sanctum center is out there, is because all of us can benefit from this. We don't have to wait for the scientific community to get on board. But my journey showed me very clearly in those 3 levels of exploration, all with an extreme amnesia. Amnesia does not usually happen to people in an NDE, but it happened in mine. And that was an important step for me to get some of the deeper and more profound lessons of the journey. And just to briefly answer your question, it all started in what I call the earthworm's eye view, primitive, porous, unresponsive realm. But I was led up through this portal of light into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing, millions of other butterflies. But the deepest message that was delivered to me in that phase of the journey was from the companion on the butterfly wing, a spiritual guide, guardian angel, a beautiful young woman with blue eyes, sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, high forehead. She never said a word to me. She never had to, but her message came directly into my awareness. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. And I cannot tell you how reassuring and affirming that was in the moment. That showed me I was in a spiritual home. A lot of our descriptions of these things might sound foreign to people, but when you get there, you get it. You've been there before. These memories come back. We all have guides and angels that help us in that part of the journey. And then I ascended from that level, which had many Earth-like features, but was also like Plato's world of ideals, that Gateway Valley, to yet another portal of light. This one generated by the music of angelic choirs that have been fueling all the festivities, joy, and merriment in that Gateway Valley. And I saw all of that collapsing down, all of 4-dimensional space-time collapsing down, a different temporal ordering that I call deep time or meta time, which allows for you to have a life review where birth, death, everything in between can be simultaneously experienced. That is showing you something very important about the nature of that spiritual realm, completely elevated out of Earth time in a way that explains why people often say these experiences cannot be put into words. They're ineffable. But in that core realm, taught so many things, and that mainly circulates around that lesson of love, kindness, and compassion. Turns out I would tumble back down to that earthworm eye view spontaneously, but I learned by remembering the musical notes of the melody, I could conjure up these various light portals that took me to these spiritual levels, and I went through them several times in this journey. And then there came a point where, as they told me in the core realm, you're not here to stay. And I could no longer conjure up that light portal into these higher levels, but I was surrounded by beings going off in the distance, many with heads bowed, some holding candles, murmuring energy coming from them that was giving me the same comfort, joy, and bliss that I experienced early on in the Gateway Valley and the core. But now I was experiencing it in this lowest kind of murky earthworm eye view level. That was surprising to me, but it was showing me, it was leading me back to this world. And then I saw 6 faces that appeared out of the muck, 5 of them were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours of my coma. That was important because they served as what are called veridical time anchors to help me realize the vast majority of my coma journey had to be between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5. I explain all that timing in the book Proof of Heaven, but ultimately, that was the value of those faces. And it was the last face I saw that brought me back to this world. It was a 10-year-old boy. And I didn't recognize him at the time, but it was my 10-year-old son, Bond. Good name, don't you think? And Bond had been protected from the worst news during this week, but now on day 7 of coma, when I've been on 3 powerful antibiotics on a ventilator all week long, showing no signs of any neurologic improvement, the doctor said it's time to stop the antibiotics. I've gone from 10% chance of survival to 2%, but with no realistic chance of recovery. Wow. That's why they said stop the antibiotics, taking him off the ventilator, end of story. And that's when I started coming back to this world. And when I did, my brain was still so wrecked by the disease, I didn't recognize my mother, my sons, my sisters. That recognition came back within hours and days. But initially waking up, all I knew was where I had just been, that extraordinary spiritual journey, which is as sharp in my memory today as if it all happened yesterday. Wow. And interestingly, there was another set of memories that came in the 36 hours after waking up from coma, when my brain was still very, very sick. And I was in and out of a paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare. I describe a lot of that in the book Proof of Heaven. Interestingly, within a few weeks, those memories had faded away. But the memories of the deep coma journey were as sharp, crisp, real, alive, and detailed as they were at the get-go. And there's several scientific papers out from a group in Italy, also from University of Virginia, describing how these memories from near-death experiences are more stable and resilient than even memories of lived traumatic experiences. They are incredibly powerful memories, and they do not jive with memories of dreams or imagined events. They are memories of very real events. And that's where this world is waking up to this much more profound reality of our shared spiritual experience.
Amazing. Okay, so one last question before I let you go. I guess on the outset of this interview, I said that the world's at a precipice. You said at an inflection, I think your word was, right? So it's an overwhelming sense that of connection for some people and a lot of disconnection for most. I think that people are really finding it hard and challenging to connect on a deeper level with their purpose and meaning in life. Like, why are they here? And what's their purpose? A lot of the pandemic experience, I think, woke people up to the degree that they're saying, like, I have been doing this profession or this vocation, whatever it is, for 25 years, and I don't like it. I've only just realized that I've grown up with this person or this relationship, whatever, and I'm not happy. I'm not happy with myself. So I just wouldn't mind getting your perspective on your near-death experience and what meaning it gave to you and your purpose, and what would you say to someone that says, like, I don't know why I'm here. I didn't have a near-death experience. I don't have the knowledge that you have, and I don't really know where my place is on Earth, on this realm.
Well, I would say that we're really here to discover much more, know thyself. I would say that is kind of a prime directive. That's written on the temple of the Oracle of Delphi, of Apollo in Delphi in Greece. Know thyself. And I would say that ultimately we're gaining knowledge of the mind of the universe, because that's what we're all sharing. But more importantly, it has to do with that incredibly powerful teacher at the end of life. And what you find is that the experience of a body dying is an amazing catalyst for spiritual growth, not only for the person who's going through the dying process, but also for others around them who witness it. And many of them might have souls taken along on, say, a shared death experience or something like that. Or many of them may have communication in the form of an after-death communication. ADCs, or after-death communication, happen in more than 50% of our population in North America and Europe, and presumably also in Australia, New Zealand, that area. Just an incredibly rich repertoire of these experiences. And what they are teaching us is that love is the most important ingredient. And that is something we tend to forget. As much as Some people, like when I was in a debate with two militant atheists, Sean Carroll and Steve Novella, back on Intelligence Squared in 2012 or 2013, I guess it was. And Sean Carroll saying, well, we all know love. So what? What else did you learn? But no, this world hasn't learned love and unconditional love and the power it has to bring us into wholeness and healing, because we've never really tried it on a large industrial scale. But that's really what we need to do, is bring that wholeness and healing into our lives, and not just to help humanity, but each of us individually can grow tremendously and come into much greater sense of harmony with life and with having meaning and purpose in life when we take care of others, when we manifest love for other beings, show kindness and compassion, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness, and never forget gratitude, because every breath is something to be grateful for. And I came to realize after my journey that the hardships and difficulties in many ways are the gifts. And the more I learn to appreciate the challenges in my life. For example, I was put up for adoption when I was 11 days old, and for much of my life, that gave me this kind of subconscious doubt as to whether or not I was even worthy of love. But I came into an answer very much in the affirmative with my near-death experience. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. These tremendous life challenges can gain a much greater explanation when we learn to transcend the kind of ego version of events and start adopting a more higher soul version of events. And the way to do that is really just to spend 20 minutes or so a day meditating. Go into a meditative space to put your little ego mind into timeout. That little voice in our head, the annoying roommate, as Michael Singer puts it. For me, when I meditate using sacred acoustics, the very first thing I do is I let that ego voice of Eben Alexander state a request, ask a question, some intention, what have you. But then it goes into timeout, because I've learned to cultivate a much richer relationship with my higher soul, the same part that I reunited with in the near-death experience, but to use that in meditation to help me in living this life and in each and every day, trying to make the kind of progress of growth and understanding. And so it involves meditation, but especially important, it also involves bringing those lessons of higher soul and of love and compassion and kindness for my fellow beings back into my daily actions, into the way I live this life. And I promise you, by meditating daily for over 11 years now, it's had a tremendous impact on my normal waking conscious awareness, to such a degree that, I'm kind of always in that meditative mode and always kind of seeing myself in relationship to others from this higher soul perspective. But it's one that's much more focused on the higher good and on the reaping the benefits of sharing love with others, the way that benefits me as a soul. And what you find is the more love you give out to the universe, the more the universe tends to give it back to you. And I can't state it in more simple terms, but I think if you take that time, 20 or so minutes a day, I try to take an hour or two a day for meditation, but whatever you have time for. And it's really getting rid of that little ego voice. The ego uses fear and anxiety as its main tools. It'll bring up childhood wounds, what Karen and I call baby wounds, like my adoption abandonment wound, things like that. But the more we can cultivate this sense of connection to the mind of the universe at large, that primordial mind, which is that God mind, and it's one that is purely of love, compassion, kindness, acceptance, taking care of the least, the last, and the lost, honoring ourselves as the sacred and divine beings we are by sharing that same sense with our fellow beings who are also sacred, divine aspects. I like to say it's like the facets on a diamond. We're each a different facet, but that diamond is the mind of God, of that God force of pure love. And that's what we're all sharing. And we're sharing it in the form of these lessons by the way we behave, the choices we make in life. And I've found that my life to become much more harmonious and graceful through the lessons I've learned and through living this life of meditation and of giving out to my fellow beings as much as I can. And I think that all of us can benefit from the world of NDEs, which teach us these profound lessons of the journey of the higher soul.
Beautiful. Dr. Eben Alexander, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much for your time and your beautiful comments about where we are, where we're heading, and what to do. I cherish your work and look forward to reading more about you. I'll put all the information about you in the show notes of the show. But once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Adrian, thanks so much for having me on, and it'll be my pleasure too. And if you ever want to have Karen on, I'd highly advise we could do that together, or you could have Karen alone. But I think you'll find her to be of great value too in this kind of discussion.
Well, that'd be amazing.
Conversation that you're getting this out to the world. Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely tee that up after we finish when we get off air. So yeah, appreciate you, mate. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Bye now.